Recently, I've been reading Hannah Arendt's 1962 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, an account of the trial of Adolf Eichmann for his crimes during the Holocaust. For those not familiar with Eichmann, he was sort of a senior manager in the Reich Security Home Office, or RHSA, the organization that was responsible for deporting, detaining, and then eventually condemning millions of Jews, Romas, and other ethnic minorities to slavery and death. Eichmann wasn't a top leader in the Nazi state. He didn't even work directly for anyone that was immediately in the inner circle. Eichmann oversaw the logistics for moving Jews and other folks. At first, his charge was to work with the Jewish communities in Germany. He met with Jewish community leaders to encourage them to willingly leave Germany. The goal was a Jew-free Germany, with Jews moved to a place where they can find their feet, to use Eichmann's words. Once these first efforts ran their course, by 1935 to 1937 or so, and as the legal repression of Jews became a feature of Nazi law, he worked with these communities to forcibly deport them, often under legal auspices that involve fees and the expropriation of property and other assets. This period lasted from 1937 to 1939. After the war started in 1939, he worked to move Jewish people first into ghettos where they could be controlled and assembled, then into work camps like Dachau and Bergen-Belsen, or death camps like Treblinka, Sobibor, or Auschwitz-Birkenau. After 1941, his charge expanded to cover all of Europe, leading offices in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and even Italy. After the war, he escaped via a rat line to South America. After his eventual capture by Israeli agents in Argentina, he participated in his defense in Jerusalem at a lengthy trial. He was found guilty by the court, hanged, cremated, and his ashes scattered at sea outside of Israeli territorial waters. Arendt characterized Eichmann as a bureaucrat, part of the machinery of genocide, almost entirely devoid of morals. He was motivated instead by a sense of order and a desire to follow orders from his superiors, and in all cases to please them. She described these characteristics as the banality of evil, or the evil thread of state authority expressed through bureaucracy that can lead to incalculable and monstrous crimes under the cover of blindly following orders. As I read this, I began to think of the Trump administration's current effort to vigorously engage in a massive and expensive effort to remigrate and deport foreign workers here legally under work visas, legal residents who've committed crimes ranging from serious to paltry, and undocumented migrants. 10 months of these efforts have produced results. Approximately 400,000 have been forcibly deported to countries across the globe, including a few to their home countries, the presumable goal of remigration. 1.6 million have apparently decided that the United States just isn't what it used to be and left on their own accord. Under the auspices of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the state resources to fundamentally deal with this huge task are in place. ICE has dozens of large detention facilities at its disposal and is quickly hiring foot soldiers. It will soon be the 9th largest military force in the world. One of these facilities was recently opened by Department of Homeland Security in my home state of Nebraska, in McCook, a rural town. Our Governor Pillen, acting without consultation with our legislature, unilaterally entered into agreement with Homeland Security to turn a work release facility into an ICE detention facility, and has refused to reveal the terms of the agreement itself. Its proximity to a small rural airport suggests that it may become an important node in the DHS ICE network. The agreement was announced about 6 weeks ago, and it has been turned over and is now functioning as an ICE detention and transfer facility. Yet ICE, the Department of Justice, and other federal government agencies tasked with parts of this plan have a lot of work to do yet to meet the goals of the Trump administration. Their goal is to deport millions of people. After reading Arendt's book, I thought it would be worth considering other historical efforts by governments who have decided to systematically move, remigrate, displace, or deport folks, or worse. First, some ground rules. I use the term systematic with intention. History is replete with genocidal massacres, pogroms, and forced displacements of people that were carried out by force, typically on deadlines. Examples of these include the evacuation of East Pakistan in 1971, the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and the forced deportation of Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijani forces in 2023. These events, though horrific and deadly in many cases, do not meet the standard, a systematic effort by the institutions of the state under the auspices of legal authority to round people up, move them, detain them, deport them, or worse. To that end, I've selected 4 cases that fit this criteria. The Holocaust from 1933 to 1945, the Cultural Revolution in China from 1966 to 1976, the Cambodian genocide 1975 to 1979, and the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina 1992 to 2000. First, the Holocaust. Initially socialized by the Nazi state as a proper separation of Jews and other ethnic groups with the goal of purifying German society, the stated goals, at first, were remigration and deportation, not extermination. That said, high-ranking Nazi officials knew from the beginning that this was their desired end state. Their problem: there were simply too many Jews in Germany to deal with. To that end, they began to build up the legal frameworks, administrative offices, and logistics necessary to control and sort out the huge numbers of Jews that would need to be processed through such a system. Of course, in the beginning, it's easier simply to get people to leave than it is to deal with them in that manner, so they attempted that first. However, the very first detention camps were built by the RHSA in late 1933, soon after Hitler took power. Increasing efforts to expand that system continued to the 30s until it was fully ready for the final solution. The effort to mass murder Jews began in earnest soon after World War II began in 1939. The efforts of the Nazis to implement it became international at the point that they invaded Poland and took over sections of Ukraine and the Baltic states and entered into agreements with other neighboring countries. The result of the Holocaust: 6 to 7 million murders, with millions more left with a legacy of trauma that reverberates to this day. The Cultural Revolution in China. During the early 1960s, Chairman Mao, Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, and a group of powerful members of the Chinese Politburo Standing Committee, these folks were known as the Gang of Four, became increasingly suspicious of other influential communist leaders who were advocating for a series of very mild economic and social reforms to communist orthodoxy. Mao and the Gang of Four saw these as reactionary and an offense to communism. They created a systematic plan to re-educate Chinese society, at first using cadres of loyal followers to attack, arrest, purge, and kill those who were even loosely associated with the reformers. Once the People's Liberation Army was fully under control of Mao and the Gang of Four, they systematically moved tens of millions of people from cities and suburban areas into rural areas with the goal of re-educating them to a rural sort of mindset. To facilitate this, a series of primitive re-education camps and farms were built to house them. As many as 1 to 2 million people were killed on these farms or in purges during the Cultural Revolution. After Mao died in 1976, the Gang of Four were deposed in a bloodless coup by the military. They were quickly imprisoned and later tried in Chinese courts. A few of them were put to death, others languished in prison for many years. The Cambodian Genocide, 1975 to 1979. Inspired by Mao's Cultural Revolution and the opportunity provided by the American withdrawal from the war in Southeast Asia, Pol Pot, a former French university student, and his Khmer Rouge seized power after a long guerrilla campaign. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, inspired by French philosopher Rousseau as well as Marx, and Pol Pot's experience with the indigenous peoples of the Cambodian countryside, had a plan. They wanted to eliminate the influence of modern society and of foreigners on the people of Cambodia, returning it to a pure state. They established a thorough plan beforehand for when and if they would take power. They identified key government officials, business people, intellectuals, artists, journalists, Buddhist monks, Christians, and non-Cambodian ethnic groups like Vietnamese, Chinese, and French folks ahead of time, creating detailed files. Once the Khmer Rouge seized power in 1975, they went to work to execute this plan rapidly. First, deporting foreigners and foreign journalists. All foreigners were deported within days. Creating a system of prison compounds in the city where thousands were executed, and moving millions of city dwellers to rural areas of Cambodia to work to build the new agrarian society they envisioned. Within a few days, they had emptied the cities of Cambodia of human life. Once the system of detention centers and work farms were up and running, the real tragedy unfolded. Around 1.3 million people were killed over the next 4 years. Furthermore, some millions died of starvation. The Khmer Rouge, in keeping with the inspiring force of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, were very hostile towards the Vietnamese, and later in their rule began to run a campaign of hit-and-run armed attacks into Vietnam proper. Vietnam looked dimly upon this and responded with total war, quickly destroying the Khmer Rouge and lifting the veil on the killing fields. Bosnia Herzegovina. The Balkan region has been a patchwork quilt of ethnicities and religions for centuries. Relationships among these peoples and systems of belief have often been tense and have led to war on many occasions, including providing the spark that lit the fuse for World War I. After the Second World War, communist dictator Tito kept a lid on these tensions in Yugoslavia by driving these identities underground by force and replacing it with a communist ideology. However, when Tito died and when communism fell in Eastern and Southern Europe in the late 1980s, a civil war rapidly ensued. Among the most diverse of the states that made up the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina rapidly became an epicenter of conflict between Serbs and Muslims. Slobodan Milosevic, the leader of neighboring Serbia, had used divisive ethnic political themes frequently during his rise to power in pre-Civil War Yugoslavia. He began to recruit Bosnian Serbs to identify and report on Muslims living in cities, towns, and villages throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina. Once the war began in 1992, Serbian forces used these reports, garnered by political officials, police, and ordinary citizens, to systematically ethnically cleanse these areas, driving refugees out of the region and moving many to detention and work camps. Soon after, Serb forces, acting on Milosevic's orders, began to murder these detainees, burying their bodies in mass graves across the countryside. 25,000 to 33,000 were killed in these camps. There were also systematic reports on the use of sexual violence against women. Over 1 million refugees were driven out of the Balkans entirely. Milosevic was overthrown by the Serbians in 2000. He and other military and political leaders responsible for these crimes were captured by police and later extradited to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Milosevic died in 2006 of natural causes during his trial in The Hague. What can we as Americans learn from these 4 cases? Systematic deportation can happen in a modern society. However, the infrastructure must be established first. Logistics, facilities, and security forces must be part of the effort. This requires resources, effort, and time. Second, the act of creating an extensive deportation campaign can be incredibly disruptive to societies, turning average citizens into informers or victims. Third, an overarching ideology can be used to justify deportation, detention, and even genocide. However, the examples of Bosnia Herzegovina and the German bureaucrats responsible for the logistics of the Holocaust suggest that exploitation of ethnic and religious tensions for purely political reasons can suffice. Finally, while deportation or remigration is often seemingly the first acceptable public goal of such efforts, it often does not achieve the end state desired by those who perpetrate it, and they often know it won't be able to. Leaders can use the system, enhanced by laws, policies, and procedures in combination with the disruptive extrajudicial environment, to obscure responsibility for carrying out those orders, pushing security forces to carry out deportations, detentions, and worse. This environment can push average citizens in society or within the security forces to perpetrate horrific crimes. In this way, the banality of evil can be turned loose through a system that obscures responsibility for individuals. I hope that folks watching this have a sense that we in America are at the very start of a dark road. The legal powers of the Trump administration and the growing power and resources of ICE and DHS, including the expansion of detention center networks and the architecture of the many, many deportation flights that leave our country for points mostly unknown every single day, represent only a first step down that road. I'm also mindful that history shares another lesson. The powers of government always tend to grow. Despite assurances to the contrary, the Trump administration has done more to grow the powers of government and the executive branch in 10 months than many presidential administrations have achieved in a full term. Furthermore, the presence of a Supreme Court that seems philosophically aligned, or perhaps only beholden, to the administration, and a Congress that is unwilling or unable to act to restrain those powers, the potential for moving beyond deportation to the monstrous crimes exemplified by the histories I've shared here is a possibility. We as a people, as political prisoner and later president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel would insist, must take personal and individual responsibility for turning aside from this road, doing what we can according to ability and our tolerance for risk. Any act of peaceful resistance helps. We can create awareness. We can support our neighbors. We can press our local, state, and national officials and representatives to investigate, speak out, and stop the momentum of the administration. The alternative may be much akin to such other episodes in American history. Just a footnote to trouble one's conscience from time to time, if at all. Yet the potential for this road to lead to much darker places, places from which our nation's ability to recover a real morality would be nearly impossible, is very real. These case histories should warn us. We can learn from them. Thank you for watching today. I hope that provided some perspective. If you have comments, please share them. I look forward to that, and this way we can learn together. I look forward to visiting with you all again very soon. Thank you.